So when it comes to thinking about your brand, the most important thing is that you have consistency, not just in what you say, but how you come across in general. You want to be studying your ideal client persona and refining what your brand stands for, the values, the messages, the beliefs, the approach that you're going to take and what makes you different. One thing that I think is a mistake when it comes to branding is when all of your posts relate to selling something. You don't want to go so far in that direction that you're not providing any value to your ideal client persona. You also don't want to go so far the other way that you never mention the fact that you are selling anything.
Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. My name is Saskia Van Tettering. I am the Prospology webinar coordinator and the host for today's exciting webinar. Actually, quite excited about this one. I'd like to just take a few minutes to introduce myself and Sophie Ash, who will be presenting today, plus a little bit about Prospology and today's subject too. So I'm actually a longtime freelance medical writer myself. I have my own business, but I'm also proud to be part of the Prospology team as well. And today we do have Sophie Ash, who is our head guru, as one might say, for the Prospology team. She's got a background in medical writing and journalism, and has successfully built her own medical freelance medical writing company as well. And she understands and understood what it took to build that kind of business. And she realized she wanted to help healthcare professionals, those in academia, who were looking to move from their careers to their own freelance medical writing business. And so in 2019, she started to launch Prospology, providing expert guidance and to first-time entrepreneurs, which all of you are as well. And Prospology isn't for everyone, but it's for people who are really very serious about their freelance medical writing business. And if once accepted, everyone can access the one-on-one coaching, medical writing courses, personalized training with Prospology's success coaches. So we have an amazing team of people that are behind Sophie that support her. So today we have a seminar about diving into what's called the 6 pillars that constitute a powerful brand. And it's based on principles from a recently published book. Sophie was one of the authors, and we hope that this event will spark discussion for you, provide you some tips. Get your pens and paper out, or computers, and we will get started. Now, a couple of housekeeping notes. One is, everyone is going to be staying on mute. And if you do have a question for Sophie, please put it in the chat box. And once we get to the Q&A, we'll work on those questions. And Sophie, if we have time, we'll get through all of them. And if not, we'll do our best. And if you do have any other issues, please send a note to me in the chat box, and we'll work on that. So without further ado, I just want to say one thing. Sophie is considered one of the premier business coaches in the industry today. So I think this will be of real value to you. And Sophie, would you like to take it away?
Thank you so much, Saskia. I'm excited for this one. As Saskia said, we will have questions throughout. So we are actually pausing a few times. So if you do put your questions in the chat, she'll kind of feed them to me when we reach those milestones. But I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started right now. Okay. Maybe I'll move this thing up to the top here. All right. So as Saskia mentioned, this has kind of spawned out of an ebook that I wrote with a branding specialist. We both had different experiences in terms of branding. Chris, who wrote the book with me, he actually helps businesses get off the ground, and a big part of that is their brand and their messaging and their content strategy and all of that stuff. And obviously, as Saskia mentioned, I'm doing that for freelance medical writers, and I've done that for Prospology and for my own medical communication agency. So I have a really good understanding of branding through my personal experience, but also everybody that I've been supporting with this. I'm going to have, I got some notes here, I got slides, so I'll kind of be going back and forth, but you should predominantly be seeing the slides anyway. So as I mentioned, I never set out to be a branding expert. It just kind of happened. I've always been really good at marketing and sales, and that tends to be the area that most people struggle with in their business. And when I realized that there was this kind of discrepancy, I decided to lean into that more and help people with the business side of freelance medical writing, because people don't always treat it as a business, and when they do, they have much better success than if they don't. And over the years, I've learned more and more about branding and about marketing, and I've had many coaches and mentors and specialists who I've worked with on that, and I've seen firsthand what works and what doesn't. So it was interesting collaborating with Chris on the book, because we had very similar experiences and similar lessons that we had taken from what we had seen and what we had learned. There were one or two things where we differed slightly in our approach, which made sense because we have different business models. But the book ended up being a really well-rounded view on personal branding. And so I have some notes here as well as the slides, because Chris was going to be presenting this with me, but he's actually pivoting his business and is still finalizing exactly what that is. So he wasn't sure if it would make sense for him to do this, and that's his priority right now. So I'm going to be presenting myself. And if you are interested in getting a copy of the book, I'll show you that at the end, because it does go into things in more detail, and you can obviously read it in your own time. And there's a lot more examples and stuff in there. So before we get into the content itself, can I leave my here? Okay. I just want to do the poll first. So let me stop sharing so that we can bring up the poll questions. There's just a few of them, but it's just my way of kind of assessing where you're currently at with your personal brand. So I'll give you a few moments to do that. All right, I have most of your responses. I'll just do another 20 seconds. All right, so I'm going to end the poll now. Thank you for those who participated. I know some of you are driving. So you should be able to see the results popping up now. Are you seeing that, Saskia? Do you want to confirm?
Yeah,
Okay.
I see it.
So in terms of confidence, we have most of you either pretty confident or kind of on the fence. And then a couple of you saying that it's new. So that's good. We have like a starting point for most of you. Hopefully there'll be some questions that will come through then. Have you had any guiding before? Yes, it was helpful. Yes, but it didn't help. Okay, so one person said they did and it wasn't helpful. Most of you who did find it helpful, but the majority have not yet had anyone guiding you with your branding. And then the aspect that you find most difficult, knowing who my ideal client is and how to attract them. A lot of you said that. And then creating and sharing brand focused content. Okay. And then a few of you saying all of the above. Okay, well, we are going to cover all of these things, but I will try to pay more attention to the ideal client part of it and the content creation as well. Awesome. So I'm going to go back to my deck now. Great. Thank you for that. Okay. So I will let you just continue letting people in, Saskia, as they arrive. So as I mentioned, this is based on an ebook that I co-wrote with a branding specialist, and we've developed these principles of a powerful brand, and this is what they are. And we're going to go through each of the 6 areas in a bit more detail. We'll have a discussion around them. Any questions, you can bring them to light. But I'll just briefly, state them now, and we'll go into each one. So the first one is establishing a consistent look and feel to your brand. The second step is to visualize your ideal client and actually determine who they are. The third step is to evaluate your competition to find a content gap. The fourth is about social media engagement and cultivating a community. The fifth is building a powerful content strategy. And the sixth is moving people off social media to turn them into clients. So it's kind of a sequential approach here, and we'll go through each of them in turn. So when it comes to thinking about your brand, the most important thing is that you have consistency, not just in what you say, but how you come across in general. So we have to think about the visual aspects of your brand as well. And a few things that you want to keep in mind here is when you're showing up online, it could be in different forums, it could be in different social media platforms, it could be in person. There are going to be differences to each of these platforms in terms of, the number of characters you have, whether you can use emojis or GIFs or graphics or what have you, how much you can customize your profile. And you should be customizing them as much as you can to try to optimize each profile to suit that platform. But if somebody is visiting one of your profiles or one of your setups, there should not be any difference when it comes to the overall look and feel of your brand. It should be very, very consistent across the board. So that is a really important thing to consider. And if you start with one, you need to think about how is this going to affect the others. If you update one, you need to update the others. And so it's that all-encompassing cohesiveness that you want to think about. So we've just put some of our brand colors on the side here to illustrate, but every time we do a webinar, for example, we always use the same colors, we use the same style, we use the same fonts, we have the same logo. And even though the format might change or the amount of copy might change, or sometimes we have much longer headlines, for example, or we have a little eyebrow like we do now for pillar number 1, it's very consistent, and you can tell that it's us because of that consistency. And so you want to have like a style guide or like a clear color palette or something, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But part of the visual aspect of your brand is going to be sharing your story, posting actual pictures of you in relation to your story and your brand. And like I said, adapting those profiles so that it's consistent across the board. One tip that I want to point out when it comes to writing your social profile biographies or the about section is there is a distinction between different types of companies in terms of how you should approach your bio. Chris and I had this discussion because, like I said, he's working with entrepreneurs who are getting their businesses off the ground, and I am too, but in the way that we were doing our marketing was very different. And so his profile, his bio was much more geared towards here's how I can provide value to you. I can solve a problem for you. I can help you transform your business, transform your life. That was the approach that he wanted to take. Whereas my approach was much more about my own personal story, because the things that I've overcome as a freelance medical writer and a business owner is my biggest asset, I would say. Yes, we could talk to the results that we've gotten our students. We could talk to more of the problem solving aspect of what we do, helping them get their business off the ground, yada yada. But for our business model, my personal story of how I built a really successful business in a short amount of time without a PhD, without any formal training, without an existing network, is the most important aspect of our brand. And maybe that will evolve over time. And I think it naturally is evolving because, as Saskia said, I'm not just a one-man band anymore. We have a whole company behind us. But it is an important distinction to make. So in most cases, the transformation that you're going to give the client is the main thing that you should be focusing on, as opposed to what you've done, because they don't really tend to care about you. They care about what they can get for themselves. And then just continuing on with this idea of the consistent look and feel is just reinforcing this idea of recognizability and how you need to be recognized in all different ways, in all different shapes and forms. Some things you can use to accomplish that would be like color palettes, having like a few primary colors or one primary and a couple of secondary, something that you can accent with, because we don't have tons of color. You don't have to have a lot of color in what you do, but if there's just a couple of accents and it's always the same, then people will start to recognize your brand. Brand marks is something that is not a logo or text, but it's more of a visual that represents your brand. So some good examples of that would be like the golden arches of McDonald's or the swoosh symbol that Nike uses in their brand. So they are visuals that will kind of convey something, and someone will have an interpretation of your brand from that. So you may want to think about things like that. Emojis as well. So Chris actually uses an axe symbol in all of his LinkedIn posts. I forget what he says, keep chopping. That's his like tagline. And so it's, just keep going. And like he uses that at the end of all of his posts. So he's very recognizable because it's in every single one of them. And so the goal is for people to know who you are immediately. So they might read something you've said and know who you are before they've even seen that it was you who posted it. Or, if they'll walk into a room and they'll already know what is going on without explicitly being told. Just like when we see the golden arches, we don't need to question what that is. It just is McDonald's. Like everybody knows that. And that's kind of like the pinnacle of what branding is that recognizability. So we're going to segue more into visualizing your ideal client. So this is the second pillar. So you want to have a really clear internal picture of who your target client is before you start creating any content. And this is really, really important for branding. And so there's a few aspects that we talk about in the book, and I'm going to go through each of them in a moment. It's demographics, psychographics, and behaviors. And so when you're thinking about who your ideal client is, one of the official terms that you can use is ideal client persona, so ICP. You'll want to be thinking about all three of these things simultaneously and how they may coexist or interplay with one another. It's not just looking at one thing. They are integrated because they are about whole people. And so we'll talk a bit more about that now. So for demographics, this is kind of the simpler one to get your head around. It's really like age, race, gender, education level, income level, those kinds of things where you can kind of organize people and say, well, they have, they've all got an undergraduate degree, or for example. So with Prospology, most people that we work with, they already have an undergraduate degree in some kind of science or medical subject. We don't look for anything more than that. And if they have like a journalism background or a marketing background or something, or they've done a lot of work in the sciences, then they don't necessarily have to meet that demographic, but it does give us a starting point. If somebody's coming in with like an English literature degree and they want to become a medical writer, it doesn't tend to work, although it's not necessarily an immediate no. It's not our ideal client. So we have to make that distinction between ideal and non-ideal. And in most cases, non-ideal, we're going to be referring them on to somebody else who can help them, because that's not, what we do. And so with the demographics, you're thinking about the problems that you can solve for people based on these categories that you might put them into. And then as we add in some of these other factors, it becomes a little bit more complex. So with the psychographics, you're getting that level deeper. So you're thinking about their dreams, their fears, their goals, their desires, their plans, things they like, things they don't like. And so it's really what makes them tick. So you're getting to understand them on a much deeper level as to why they do what they do and who they actually are and what they care about. And so one example that we give in the book is, if you have an account director at a pharma company, for example, then when we think about their demographics, it might be like they're 40 to 50 years old, they earn like, I don't know, 120K a year, they are educated to a certain level, like they have a degree and then they did this and that. We can think about some of the problems they may have, like maybe they have too much on their plate and they are struggling to handle all the projects that they've got going on because some of their freelancers are not getting things done on time, or they're not reliable, or what have you. So that's what we can get from the demographic side. But when we add in the psychographics as well, then we're thinking, what is that deeper issue for them, and why, like what is driving them? So they may have a fear, for example, that they are not spending enough time with their family, and that their kids are going to grow up and not really know them and not really bond with them, and that they're going to have regrets about that. And so that ties into this problem of like, I have too much on my plate, but it's a much deeper association with that problem. And so when you can really narrow down on what those things are, or what those things might be, then you can actually, it makes it much easier to come up with a targeted content strategy. And then lastly, we have behaviors. So this is what people actually do in any given situation. And this is like, painting a detailed picture of who they are and how they behave, because people don't always act in the way that we would expect them to. So this is where you have to look at all three of these things in one go, because you might have assumptions about a couple of these things, but if they don't actually translate into the behavior that you would expect, then your content or your marketing is just not going to land. And so one great example that I can give to illustrate that is, when a lot of freelance medical writers first start their business, they might have the assumption that all the other medical writers are going to be competitors of theirs. And so you might expect that, like I might expect that a new freelance writer might have this behavior of like not really mingling too much with other writers, like keeping their cards close to their chest and not really talking about their business model or their pricing or what they do, because they don't want to lose that business to somebody else. Whereas in actual fact, that is not really the case. If you look at like the whole demographic and everybody who's in the industry, they're all very happy to share and talk about what they're doing, because they all have a very specific niche that they operate in. They all have very defined preferences and experiences. They're all in different locations. They know there's more than enough work to go around, and so there isn't actually that competitive behavior at all. So if I had developed a content marketing campaign around that behavior, I would not get very far, because it wouldn't land with them at all. So that's one thing to keep in mind. All right, any questions so far about pillars 1 or 2? So that's the visual identity, and then like the figuring out who your ideal client is.
So we don't have anyone as yet in the chat box asking any questions, but if anybody has one, please put it in and I'd be happy to relay it to Sophie.
All right, well, we'll continue, and if anything comes in later on, feel free to put it in the chat box. I'm sure that as we present more, you'll have more thoughts and ideas. Oh, I see something come in now.
Yeah, did you see visual ID? What do you think about a color or a logo reflecting, I believe that's personality?
So it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, does your personality matter to your clients? This is something that you really have to ask yourself. Are they going to be looking for a certain type of person, or are they just looking for something to solve their problem? That's a really important distinction to make. So for Prospology's brand, it kind of was built on my personality in a way, because it's very bold, it's very strong. I mean, you can see just by this this question slide right now, you know, we're just out there. We don't hold anything back, and that really is a reflection of my personality, because I openly share and I'm kind of driving things forward. And but that was an important part of our brand, because it's built on my story and what I've been able to accomplish and how that feeds into what we now do. Whereas you just want to think about your logo and your colors and everything visually from the perspective of, would your client resonate with that? Like, would that help them feel more comfortable that your company is best for them, for their purposes? And yeah, you can definitely ask around and get other people's perspectives as well, like when you're in the ideation phase, and I do encourage that. That's a big part of what we do as well, is like students will throw around ideas about the visual aspects of their brands, and we have a graphic designer and a website specialist in-house who can provide feedback on that and say, you know, I don't know that this actually reflects the brand that you want to convey. Like, let's try use like, I don't know, harder lines or like bolder colors, or maybe something a bit more silvery if it's more technology based, you know what I mean? So we have associations between visuals and words and feelings, and it's about thinking about all of those in cohesion with each other.
Thank you, Fiona, for that question. Noelle has a question. What about some of the ways that we can learn about our ideal clients' hopes and dreams? So is there anything you can add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. I think I think some people have more intuition about these things than others. At a certain point, we do have to make some assumptions, but then we need to go away and research those assumptions and see if they're actually true. So one way to do that is to be gathering data as you're working with clients. So when you have your first 1, 2, 3 clients, is to really sit down and think, like, why do I think that they hired me? What do I think was the turning point for them, or the thing that made them want to hire me? And you can even ask them directly, and that's a great idea. But you'll start to see patterns in how they emerge, and you can allow your brand to kind of solidify through that. So you're doing it in real time. Obviously, we want to do as much as possible up front though, and really it comes down to just networking and talking to people in the field and asking them like what they want, what they need, and why they want that, and why they need that, why that's important to them. Is those why questions that are gonna help dig deeper to get to like the fears and the dreams and the beliefs and all of that stuff. And that is what actually leads them to decide to hire, as opposed to the surface level problem that they might have. So it comes about through these conversations and through networking and through having peers that you can talk to, and through experimentation and through talking directly with your clients as you get them. So that's really what it comes down to, I would say.
Okay, I tried to put the note quickly as you were speaking, so there's no other question at the moment, so.
Okay, I'll move on and then we'll pause again shortly. Okay, so competitive analysis. This is an interesting one. It's not something that everybody thinks about, but is really, really important for branding. And the more you think about it, the more unique your brand will become, and the more distinctive it will be, and the more well-known you will be as well. So one way to figure out how you can make a niche for yourself in the field, or how you can stand out in the field, is to evaluate your competition. I didn't do much of this in the beginning because I tend to prefer to just stay on my own path and not get distracted by what everyone else is doing. It can bring up a lot of doubt because you're comparing, and then, you're like, oh, they do this really well and I'll never be as good as them. And all of this stuff will come up. So be prepared for that. But you want to be as objective as you can. So how do you know who your primary competitors are? Well, it's people who are the most comparative to what you do, and those who are the most popular in that area. So for us, it's anyone who offers coaching or support to freelance medical writers. Could be a course, could be coaching, could be like a one-on-one thing, could be a group program. There are some that are fairly well known, and those would be our competitors. And so what you want to do is identify who those people are, who those companies are, and then you want to make a direct comparison between how they're similar and how they're different, and kind of write that out and have that be really clear. And then you want to look at their brand in more detail, including their content, their storytelling, the tone of voice that they use, everything that they do, every way in which they show up. And you want to start making that comparison of what is similar, what is different, to really map that out and get a clear picture of what the market is like. Just a tip here, everybody should know this, but not everybody implements it, is that we have to be very specific with who we are marketing to. And one of the ways to do that is to identify your competitors and understand how you're different from them. The more you lean into those differences, the more you will attract the right kinds of people and eliminate the wrong kinds of people. And that is good. You don't want to be trying to attract everybody or speak to everybody, because it's not going to work. Actually, a great example of this is I've been working on an article for the European Medical Writers Association magazine. It's coming out next month, I think, either April or May. And I had written it's about the 12 milestones of success as a freelance medical writer. So it talks about how do you identify your success on like a scale or on like a journey. Not everybody is going to get to every stage, because not everybody will be at the top of the hierarchy or what have you. But at least it gives you a way to assess, like, where am I? Do I feel good about where I am? If not, what would be the next stage of evolution, and how would I know that I was at that point? And so I had written it from the perspective of like all of the experience that I have in this field, and everything that I've experienced, and everything that I've seen in students and through all the people I've spoken to. And then when we got the final draft looked at by the editor of the magazine, he said, oh, should we be using the word medcoms here, because this implies like just a certain subset of medical communications, and it doesn't include regulatory writing or people who write for medical devices and stuff like that. And I, for a moment, I was kind of questioning, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be so specific, because maybe this does also apply to more people. But then when I started asking around, I talked to some experts in the field. I really thought things through, and it came down to the fact that most people don't feel comfortable with niching. They don't feel comfortable with eliminating certain people so that they can have a strong message to those who need it. And my instinct from the beginning was to be specific, because this is for people in the med comms industry. This is not for regulatory writers. I can't speak to that industry. I can't speak to that experience. I can't say that it does extrapolate. And therefore, I went back to the editor and I said, no, this is for med comms people. I don't care if like 60% of people are eliminated. That's who it's for, and that's who I want it to be written to. So that, I stepped into my brand, and I'm like, this is what makes us different, and that's what we're going to do. So another thing you can look at in your competitors is content specifically. So where do you have a different belief or a different approach to what they have? And what does that look like exactly? Because these are the things that will set you apart from your competition. You also want to think about the values that the company has, and your own personal values, and compare those, because you're never going to have all of the same values, and your values are going to be a really big dictator as to what your content is. I think I had a good example of that, actually. Yeah, so one example is that a lot of people in the medical writing space will talk about how important it is to have a PhD, and all the things you can do with your PhD, and how it makes you stand out, and all of this stuff. There's a whole like belief around that. There's a value that like education is really important in this field, and that their brand is based around that. We chose to go in the completely opposite direction, because I do not have a master's degree. I don't have a PhD. I don't have extensive education aside from my bachelor's of science. And everything that I've learned and accomplished has been through skills that I've developed, and networking, and the sales, and all of that. So our brand leans heavily the other way. Like, you don't need a PhD to be successful as a freelance medical writer. You don't need an advanced degree. You don't need an existing network. You don't need to do all this fancy training. You just need to hone these skills so that you can monetize them. So that's a really big part of our brand. And part of that came to be through recognizing, like, oh, other people are talking about something different, so we're going to go the other way. So that's a good example of that. And then focus on conveying specific messages through intentional community. We're going to talk more about community building shortly. All right, so moving on to pillar number 4. When you have identified what your content gap is, and you may have a few of them, we certainly have a few, you don't want to start posting straight away, because there's this period of kind of honing your messaging and being very strategic as to how you approach that. So what we suggest, what Chris and I have both done and both heard recommended from all the gurus out there, is to start by just commenting on other people's stuff. You want to be engaging with your competitors' content, with people in the field in general. You want to be studying your ideal client persona and refining what your brand stands for, the values, the messages, the beliefs, the approach that you're going to take, and what makes you different. The commenting allows you to start building your own community, because people who like what you have to say are going to follow you. They're going to look you up. They're going to see what you're up to. And it's just as powerful as posting stuff yourself, but it's kind of like the training wheels in the process, because it gives you that it just gives you more confidence that you're going to approach it in a way that's going to resonate with your people. And so that's how you actually open doors. This is one of Chris's content gaps, actually, is a lot of people who talk about branding, they will say that consistency is the most important thing. You have to be posting every day, you have to be commenting every day, showing up all the time. And when you do that, you'll build community. Well, that is partly true because consistency is really important, because it's marketing. It's a form of marketing, and you are your own personal brand. So you're showing up and doing your marketing. But it's only half of the picture. So what Chris's content gap is that consistency itself doesn't actually lead to opportunities. Community does. And if you want to have a community, then you need to actually be providing value to your audience. You need to actually be connecting with them. You don't really want to focus on like just being known by people. You want to focus on like the quality of the connections that you're making, and let your content drive your business. So as I mentioned, that starts with the comments. It's a lot less stressful. It helps you figure out what to post, what not to. And you get a lot more visits to your profile, which helps kickstart the whole process. And this is your chance to practice having that consistent tone and voice every time you show up. Not sure if you're all aware of this, but when somebody goes to your profile, one of the first things that they see is your activity on the platform. I'm talking about LinkedIn specifically, but I'm not sure exactly how it goes for the other platforms. I know you can see somebody's activity though, if you look for it. And those comments say a lot about you as a personal brand and as an individual, because that's if they're seeing a discrepancy between your comments and what you post, it's inauthentic. It just screams inauthenticity, and they're not going to trust you. They're not going to like it. Like everybody has that instinct of like, this isn't real, this isn't right, this person is not who they say they are. And they will see that. They will see that. And they'll also see like, if you're active, that this is someone I want to follow and I want to hear from them. If you're not active, like why would they follow? It just doesn't make any sense. So you're combining that consistency with the value that you provide. And so to go into that a bit deeper, talking about the cultivation of community, that's really what the goal is on social media initially, is to have content that is actually geared towards your ideal client persona. Yes, we can post personal things, we can post, things that we've done, experience, and what have you. But when you think about it through the lens of your brand, you'll find some kind of angle to present that in a way that makes it relevant. So, for example, let's see. If I wanted to talk about, like recently, my agency has been dissolved. I was doing that for a few years. It was going really well. I had a business partner and things didn't go too well working together, and we wanted to go in different directions with the company. So I ended up leaving. He continued for a while, and then we just decided, let's just call it, because we're not enjoying it. We're both doing other things now. It doesn't make sense. If I ever want to do anything like that in the future, I can start something else up. But I feel like that phase is kind of done for me. So if I wanted to write something about that, like I wouldn't just start complaining about, oh, things didn't go the way I intended for them to go. Like no one's going to learn anything from that. I wouldn't be like, oh, I'm really sad that my agency is closed, like blah, blah, blah. Like it doesn't add anything. It doesn't add any value. But if I talk about the lessons that I've learned from that, like I know what it takes to build a multi-six-figure business. I know what it takes to hire full-time employees and to have them on payroll and put them on health insurance and, take them through all this training and nurturing. And I know what it's like to hire people, to fire people. I know what the client expectations are like, and how it is to work directly with pharma companies. So there's a lot that I learned from that are really positive and really valuable to the people in my network who may want to learn about that. So that's how I would talk about it. So eventually you're kind of transitioning from only commenting to a combination of commenting and posting. You want to kind of do 50-50 of each. The consistency is most important. So you don't necessarily have to post every day, but you do need to have like a set day and time where you post. on a regular basis. So like maybe every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 2 p.m. or something. You need to have that schedule because the algorithm will come to learn what your activity is, and they will that you're kind of building a trusting relationship with the algorithm in a way, because it knows you're going to show up, and then it boosts things at that time. If it's more sporadic, it doesn't really know where it stands with you, and it doesn't really know if it should be promoting you or not, because it doesn't want to put things out into the world and then have you just ignore all of the responses. And this is where the community building really comes in. If you are posting something, be prepared to have a discussion about it. Be prepared to have a debate about it, even for people who might not agree with you or who are going to challenge what you have to say. That will happen, and you need to be able to step up and speak on behalf of your brand in those situations. One thing that you can do, which is a tip that some experts recommend, I don't personally do this because I never run out of ideas, but if you're one of these people who are like, I don't really know what to post about, and we will talk more about that in the other pillars, but when you are commenting, you can actually save comments in LinkedIn. You can also put them in like a swipe file or just some document somewhere. The ones that gain a lot of traction, or the ones that are like when you have thought-provoking discussions with people, save those, because those will become posts in their own right. And you can tag people who gave you the idea for a post. You can repurpose what someone else has said and put your own spin on it. That's another form of community building, is to acknowledge where the inspiration comes from. We have a lot of students, for example, or graduates, who will mention that they did this program with Prospology, and they'll talk about some of the things that they learned and have implemented and some of the results that they've gotten. And it serves several purposes. It obviously helps them gain a broader reach with that content, because they're pulling me in, they're pulling the company in. We're going to be like, hey, it's so great to see you succeeding, all of that. Because we want to be seen. But it also conveys to their audience that they are well established, that they have credibility, they have experience now. They're really taking their business seriously, and they've learned a lot. And so it makes both of us look good, and that's part of the community building. And then people who follow them may follow us, and vice versa, because we have these similar values and similar beliefs. So that is pillar 4. Any questions about anything that we've covered so far, either the competitive analysis or the community building aspects, or anything that we covered before that?
We don't actually have any questions at the moment, but if you do have any, feel free to put them in the chat box.
How are we doing for time, Saskia?
It's 10:02, 9:02 actually.
All right.
So I think we're doing okay in terms of
Okay. I can't see that because I'm full screen.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll continue, and then we'll have some final questions at the end.
Okay.
So I'll get through the rest.
Thank you.
All right. So pillar 5. This is something that I'm very experienced in and comfortable with. And so if anyone, wants to talk more about that, we can. When you get to the point where you have a very well-defined brand, you know who your ideal client persona is, you know what your content gaps are, you then want to start being more strategic with how you create content and put it out there. So one important distinction to make is the difference between a content bucket and a content frame. So content buckets are actually topics that you might talk about. So for example, for Prospology, we talk a lot about freedom, entrepreneurship, branding, medical writing, client relationship management, that kind of stuff. I would say those are kind of our primary topics. So those are content buckets. So you'll want to have a handful of those, like maybe 4 or 5 of them, that you use on a regular basis to create content for your brand. And once you have those, you want to think about the content frames. So those are actually types of posts. So you might have a text post, it could be like a story or something that you've learned or something you want to share in text format. Obviously, there's visuals as well. Like some platforms will support GIFs or animations or what have you, but images always work. You have quotes, you have video clips, you have testimonials, graphics, like anything that you want to share. So then you can take one content bucket, let's say freedom, and then you can come up with at least 5 different ways of talking about that. And you can get even more granular with it. So let's say, so right now I'm traveling a lot. I just got back from a trip and I'm also on a trip, and then I'm going to be going back to Canada and spending some time there. So I might write something about how great it is to have the freedom to be able to travel whenever I want. I don't have to answer to anyone else's schedules. I can, decide what I want and when I want it. I actually just had a call yesterday with one of my contacts who said, oh, my wife wants to go to Hawaii, so I'm just going to go find a medical conference in Hawaii and pitch a topic to them and then just get a speaking engagement over there. And he managed to get like a 4-day trip out of it, and they paid for his accommodation and his wife got to go. And I was like, oh cool, like I do that kind of thing as well. Like if I want to go somewhere, I'll just find a reason to bring my business over there and do some networking or what have you. And the more I get into speaking, the more I do that kind of thing. So I might write a text post about that conversation and how awesome that is. And then I might also have like an image of me and John, who I was talking about, and like this conversation that we had. And then I might have a quote that relates to that, and then just add a few comments. So you get what I mean. So one idea can end up becoming like a whole bunch of other ideas. And so you want to have a variation in the topics and the types of posts so that your audience stays interested and engaged. But you want to stay specific to those 4 or 5 content buckets so that you're not diluting your brand. So the idea is to find a balance between the two. Use the frames to create variety, but keep those buckets pretty succinct so that your brand is more recognizable. So as I mentioned, you can kind of mix and match the buckets and the frames to make interesting combinations, to add more diversity. It means that you'll never run out of ideas, but it also means that your brand is going to be very consistent. And so one thing that you can do is you can kind of make a table, and you can have your buckets on one side and then your frames on the other, and then you can kind of fill in the gaps. So whenever you've done some posts, you can be like, how can I repurpose this? How can I make this go further or say this in a different way? And if you do that, you can very easily map out a content strategy or a calendar for the whole month and then schedule them ahead of time. So you can use scheduling tools, you can use things like Airtable to organize your posts and get things ready, and figure out which order you want to put things in, because you may write all of them at the same time in a certain topic, but you're not going to post them back to back. So you'll write them and then you'll kind of space them out and have some other stuff in between, and that way it doesn't seem like it's being repetitive. Moving on to the final pillar is the idea that we don't want to use social media to just grow a following. That is completely useless when it comes to business, because at the end of the day, it's all about making money and making sales. So the actual goal is getting people off your social media onto a discovery call. So you need to keep that in mind when you're using your profile and when you're using the platform and setting up your profile. So one thing that I think is a mistake when it comes to branding is when all of your posts relate to selling something. You don't want to go so far in that direction that you're not providing any value to your ideal client persona. You also don't want to go so far the other way that you never mention the fact that you are selling anything. Like occasionally you want to do that, or you want to have that as like at the bottom of the post to remind them that, hey, we're here and we do this and that if you need any help. But predominantly it's about sharing your learnings with your ideal client persona in relation to the problems that they're facing, the beliefs and the values and all of that stuff that we talked about. One way to think about getting them onto a call is to place your calls to action strategically. So at the end of your bios, you always want to have a call to action underneath your posts, like I mentioned, or even in the comments themselves. So rather than upfront being like, we do this, we sell this, we're looking for clients, put it as like a call to action at the end of something so that they can go find you and learn more if they want to, but it needs to be there consistently. And call to action is just a prompt to say, book a call or learn more or what have you. Kind of extrapolating from that is the idea of having real-time conversations. There's only so much that talking to people online can accomplish. You really need to just have that face-to-face time with them, whether it's on the call or on a Zoom or what have you. That is what forms genuine connections, and that is what builds trust, and that is what allows you to build long-term relationships with clients. And it's really the only opportunity you have to hear what their needs are and acknowledge them in real time, and to recognize what that below the surface pain is. Like we mentioned, you wouldn't necessarily know from like online interactions what they really care about and what's going on in their lives. But if you start to talk to them, they might open up about what they're dealing with right now and like how difficult things are or what have you. And that gives you an opportunity to offer to help. And so the takeaway here is that the real-time connections come from those face-to-face interactions, and that's how you build those genuine working relationships. Using scheduling apps or things that make it really easy for people to set up calls with you is highly recommended. Calendly is a great one, but really they all do the same thing. And as long as they can see your availability and book something in, then it makes them super easy. So I recommend that. All right, any final questions about the content that we've covered? Actually, before that, I'm just going to summarize and we'll go back to that. So these are the 6 pillars that we covered. So you want to start with thinking about the consistent look and feel of your brand. Then you want to really hone in on who your ideal client is. Evaluate your competition, figure out what your content gap is. Then you want to start engaging and building community. And then when you come to post yourself, you want to have a powerful strategy around that using the content buckets and frames. And then thinking about how am I going to move people onto a call and get them off social media to turn them into clients. This is the book that I mentioned. If you do go to our website, prospology.com, you can download it. It's only $29 and it does talk about all these pillars in more detail with more examples and tips and things like that. And a bit more of Chris's perspective in there. And then finally, follow me on LinkedIn if you haven't already. I'm posting at least a couple of times a day about entrepreneurship, about freedom, about how to fit everything into your lifestyle and actually enjoy the work that you're doing and being authentic in business, branding, of course, sales, all of that stuff. We have a Sunday newsletter. If you are new to medical writing or you're still setting up your business, great thing to get onto because we're always talking about successes of people in the field and what they've been up to, and we'll share free resources and events that are coming up. And we also have a LinkedIn newsletter, which is more geared towards entrepreneurship in general and the freedom focused lifestyle aspect of that. So it's not medical writing specific, it's more kind of broader if you're an entrepreneur or you know other business owners who might be interested in that. We will have the recording available. $15 helps us pay all the people who put all of this together and allow us to keep this going. But yeah, that's who we are, what we do. We help people get their businesses off the ground. Usually it's clinicians, pharmacists, nurses, physicians, academics, scientists, journalists, who don't really know the business and marketing side of things, but they feel pretty confident on the writing side. And so we help them bridge all of those gaps. But yeah, I'll stop sharing and open up for questions. I know we're a couple of minutes over, but feel free to ask away if you have anything.
We did have a question from Anna earlier. Should we focus on building a community of other freelance writers and make valuable content for them, or focus on the client we would like to have? And that was her question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it needs to be focused towards the client, but your content is going to be fairly broad in that your buckets are going to be more, you'll have some that may be related to a therapeutic area or a certain type of writing that you do, but you're not necessarily going to have that much to say about those things. So you want to also have some buckets that are a little bit broader, like values that more people would share, or like the relating to the way that you show up in business as an individual, things that you believe in. And so having a combination of like more specific niche related topics versus like some broader values-based ones will help you connect with a broader community. So you will have some medical writers in there, and they'll kind of be engaging with your stuff in the same way in terms of thinking about how their brand is coming across when someone sees their comment on your post. So that bigger picture that we were talking about. But really, it's showcasing your personality in relation to the values and the beliefs that your brand holds in a consistent way, and get some of the personal aspects of it in there, as long as there are lessons learned and things that relate to those content buckets. And you will likely attract both demographics, and that is fine. Hopefully that helps.
All right. Anybody else? Any other questions? We have a few more minutes if you'd like. All right.
Thanks, everyone. We'll have more webinars coming up, so do get on the email list if you aren't already, and they'll be over on LinkedIn as well. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.